That was the closing section of Henry Purcell's Praise the Lord, O Jerusalem, as recorded by Voces 8 with the wonderful French Baroque group Les Inventions with director Patrick Ayrton. And I'm very pleased to say that Patrick has joined me today. So thanks very much for coming, Patrick.
It's lovely to be with you, Barney.
Now,
thank you so much for the invitation.
Absolute pleasure. You and your wonderful instrumentalists have, over the years, played a really important part in the discography, not just the discography, but also the performance, and I would say actually development of the music making in Voces 8. So do you want to just give us a little bit of an introduction to who you are and what you do before we have a chat?
I'm basically a trained organist and harpsichordist, and I'm a director, and I set up Les Inventions about, 15 years ago, something like that. And it was per chance because I had stumbled on an interesting composer from where I live. I live in Burgundy, close to Chalon-sur-Saône, which is a quaint, rather sleepy little town. But in 1727, a composer was born there who actually later studied with Tartini. Tartini was the high fits, the great violin maestro and teacher who attracted students from all over the world. He was in Padova, Italy. And so I researched Touche-Moulin, that was his name, Joseph Touche-Moulin, lovely name, Mr. Touch-Mill. And we made a CD, and through that, I don't know how it all ended, but at one point we were in a festival and you were there, and that's how our love story with Voces 8 started, didn't it? I think it was through our dear common friend, Ulrich Mester.
I know you do a lot of teaching, don't you? You're a member of the faculty at the Early Music Conservatoire in The Hague, in the Netherlands. Is that right as well?
Indeed, yes. I've had that position for now almost 25 years. And the other day, it dawned on me that actually I started as a really young teacher. I was an assistant to Ton Koopman. And back then I was the baby on the faculty, and the other day I realized that I'm now the oldest one, and all the others are much younger. Some of the people on the faculty are my former students. I would say The Hague is with Basel, where you studied, Barney, and maybe a few other places, one of the leading early music faculties in the world. I teach thorough bass, improvisation, chamber music, and stuff like that.
Fantastic. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. You mentioned that we met doing a concert. I remember it very vividly. We were in an orangery in the south of France, and you're absolutely right. It was a festival set up by the group singing teacher who I've mentioned in a few of these presentations, called Ulrich Mesthaler. And I specifically remember that the piece was J.S. Bach's Sing It dem Herrn, and you have been drafted in by Ulrich to accompany Voces 8. And it was unusual because we actually had two harpsichordists, if you remember. It was you and Marcus Herniger from Basel. And I very vividly remember standing next to you whilst you were playing and just absorbing this incredible energy that you had for the music. And I still remember how impressed I was by your playing, and how much your playing actually helped me to sing the piece better. And we got talking, didn't we, about some projects that we could do together. I think the first one that we probably did was in Dijon Opera House in 2012. We did cantatas for Easter Day. Would that be the first?
That was the first, I think, indeed. Well, thank you for your very kind words. I must say that likewise, I was so impressed to discover the group. Just to be precise, I had met other members of Voces 8, I think a year or two before, when we were performing in Ulrich's festival down in the south of France, near to where he has a house. But I didn't meet you, Barney. I met Emily. I think your brother was there, Paul, and a few others who had come to. I think you had split that evening, and I think 3 or 4 of you had come to the concert, which I was giving with my daughters. It's a wonderful memory. But I do remember it. I remember when we actually finally met, Barney, and that was indeed at the Orangerie. It's the same. We're talking the same festival, but another location. And yes, it was. I was so amazed by you guys. I remember you had to wait and wait and wait and wait because you were appearing last on the program, and you waited.
I don't remember that.
You waited, and you had. I think you had travelled, and you were knackered, and you were jet lagged as usual, and all that. And I thought, my God, are they going to just be able to get through this? You know, it's not an easy piece. And you just got up there and you just sang it, and I was just amazed. I was just amazed. So fresh, as if it had just come out of the oven.
Well, this all gave birth, didn't it, to a decision that we should record together. And you had this spark of an idea of this chap called Benedetto Marcello, and the fact that he'd written all these settings of psalms which had been translated into English, and modern editions of those never existed. So I remember that we sent off to the British Library, was it? We sent off to, and we got all of these photos of facsimile, and Jim Clements went through it and transcribed all this music, and we put together, I think, quite a very interesting reinvention project of this Marcello, which I'm actually, just before we talk about it, going to play a little part of it. Do you want to talk about, can you remember anything at all about the Canon Triplex?
I do. The Canon Triplex, that's a very interesting piece. Well, you know, Marcello was, in his day, one of the most famous composers. You know, many composers, unfortunately, have become famous when they're dead. And that was the case of Bach, and that was the case of Mozart. Mozart was famous when he was a kid, but later everybody had forgotten about him. But it was not the case, for instance, of Haydn, who was in his time one of the most glorious composers. And before that, indeed, Marcello. We have letters by Telemann to Marcello congratulating him on his psalms. They were translated in at least 6 or 7 languages. And the Avison versions, because Charles Avison was an English organist, and together with one of his friends decided, oh, we are going to set up the Marcello Society, and they did some fundraising, and they got the money together to print a beautiful publication to have all the psalms, the 50 psalms set to music by Marcello, translated and set to, and the music remains the same. But of course the text is English, and I'm very proud, Barney, that you, Voces 8 and Les Inventions, did the world premiere of a selection of these psalms by Marcello, revised by Avis, and it's a wonderful memory. And that CD actually got a lot of praise and was really noticed in France. Actually, remember we got some nice reviews here. Something to be proud of, for sure.
One thing I remember about it was that it was unusual music, and it wasn't all scored, was it, for soprano, alto, tenor, bass? So a lot of the time, some of the singers were not in the sessions, some of the Voce 8 singers, but I was in each of the psalms because they all had an alto part, and I remember that you and I were basically in everything. We worked really, really hard. And whenever we stopped, the others would have prepared food, but there was some problem. We recorded in a very remote location in the middle of France, a place called Ayrton. We maybe talk about that in a minute, but I remember there was a problem with the supermarket, and every time we left the session, the only thing the guys had managed to cobble together to eat was couscous.
Yes,
we were there for like a week just eating couscous and recording Marcello. I'm not sure I've really wanted to eat couscous since. Not that it wasn't nice, but the track I'm going to play is this fantastic canon triplex, which is
yes, the canon triplex. I just wanted to add before you play that. Yes, indeed. This is Marcello was considered. He was a dilettante, as we say in Italy. He was a nobleman, and like many noble people, he endeavored in the arts, and many of them were good painters, good composers. He of course didn't make music for his living. He was very high up in the administration in Venice, and as I said, he was a nobleman. But the canon triplet so he was composed. He was considered sometimes as a sort of, yes, amateur composer, but he was very, very capable of doing a damn piece of counterpoint, and that's the case of the canon triplex. It is a wonderfully crafted, very intelligently composed setting with beautiful voice leading and very intricate and cunning polyphony.
Okay, well, let's hear it then. This is the couscous fueled rendition
Indeed.
of the canon triplex by Benedetto Marcello. That was Benedetto Marcello's Canon Triplex, as recorded by Voces 8 and the wonderful maestro Patrick Ayrton with his orchestra Les Inventions, a disc we made 8 years ago now. It seems wonderful, wonderful memories. Now, you mentioned earlier, Patrick, that you were teaching at The Hague, and you specifically said that one of the things you teach is basso continuo. So could you maybe just talk to us a little bit, for those people who either know a little bit about it or don't know much about what basso continuo is, but the role of basso continuo and what it is that you have to teach then?
Yes, well, when in the sort of late, we could say the late Renaissance, when more and more instruments joined in to accompany singers, the keyboard instruments played a very important role. They were there to reinforce the harmony. And so they would generally just double the harmony. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking organ, I'm talking harpsichord, whether it was in the church or at court, there were always keyboard instruments. And they were, in the early stages, they were just playing all the voices. Then, bit by bit, one realized that it was not very practical. So the expression of the harmony was reduced to symbols, generally numbers, placed above the bass. So if you saw nothing, it meant a root. So chord, that's root. If you saw a 6 above a note, well, you play a 6 chord. So above a B, it would be a G. And you'd fill in the 2 other sonorities. Yeah. If you see a 7, well, it gives this. Yes. If you see a 9, it gives. Yeah. And these kind of things. If you diminish 7, would be the Dracula chord, one you hear in scary films. And so it's a true art. Basically, it's like jazz. You know, in jazz, you see numbers. And you have to recreate the harmonies. Well, we do the same thing. It's a very similar system. And of course, the extraordinary thing about this is that in the 17th and 18th century, which are sometimes called, in German, it's called the time of, it's the Generalbasszeit, so the time in which thorough bass was very important. We have countless treatises, so many sources written by numerous composers who explain how to do this. It's a fascinating world. And of course, I'll finish by saying, well, basso continuo is the very first step towards improvisation, because when you're improvising, you're composing here and now, aren't you? So these ideas are not falling from the ceiling. You need to have them in your little compositional suitcase. So extemporization goes together with basso continuo.
Great. So just to give, I'm going to put you on the spot, to give our viewers a true understanding, could you just play, first of all, maybe the bass line, a very simple bass line, and then do 2 different realizations to it, just so people can appreciate quite how much improvisation there is involved. Something really simple, and see what. Yeah,
I'll do one of my favorite party tricks is just to play the canon, the Pachelbel canon. So everybody knows the Pachelbel canon. Goes down 4, 1 up. So the bass goes down 4 and up 1 and down 4 again and up 1 and down 4. Right? And then there's a cadence, what you call. Yeah. So now I could harmonize this just very simply. But I could I could make it more spicy. And in that, I'm going to add dissonances. So I'm not going to go into, it's generally harmony is based on consonance and dissonance. So a dissonance will be this. So I could put a lot of dissonance in that scheme. So. So I put in some cheeky chromatism now. Well, all that is expressed in basso continuo. So I have many, many figures. Sometimes if you take a Bach cantata, for instance, and you take any aria or a recit, and you, Barney, you've sung, of course, loads of these recits and arias. Well, the organist sometimes has to, it's actually, it's pretty sweaty stuff, because you need to literally figure it out. And some of the figures are very complex.
Well, I think to people listening, whenever you hear this style of music, this Baroque music, always listen into the harpsichord, because that realization brings so much of the character and the energy to the music. And referring back to what I was saying about standing next to you and Sing It Dem Herrn, this was what I loved so much, was your level of invention and the way that you were improvising the music into Bach almost, which of course Bach is, in my view, pretty much perfect, but the way that you brought that to life for me was incredible. And now whenever I conduct, whenever I'm fortunate enough to conduct Baroque orchestras, I'm because of the work I've done with you, I'm always acutely aware of exactly the way the harpsichordist or keyboard player, tremolo player is realizing things. And the work you've done, because we worked so much together in my formative years as a sort of professional director, so much of the way you play has informed my palette, I suppose, actually, as a director these days. So it has a huge impact.
Well, that's very kind. That's very nice to hear, Barney. And likewise, I must say that working with Voces 8 always reminded me about how wonderful it is to sing. I remember in the summer academy you give, I remember singing in one of the even songs. Yeah. I was standing next to Chris, and you were directing it, and I was singing alto, and that's because your brother Paul had heard me sing alto. He said, "Ooh, actually, that's a pretty nice voice. Why don't you come sing alto in our even song?" And that's one of my most wonderful memories. And yes, well, likewise, I think this is the great thing. Musicians come together and they trade. They trade whatever they have to offer, their specialities, and they learn from each other. That's the most wonderful thing about sharing music.
I completely agree. Yeah, I completely agree. And I want to talk a little bit about the Purcell album that we made. And now you're coming to us, as you've already said, from the middle of France. So first of all, I have a question from Andrew, actually, about your cat Dagobert, who is famous in the in Voces 8 as the cat that used to come and have dinner with us. He sat up at the table. But Andrew has noticed that he's not been so active on Instagram recently. So we wanted to check everything was okay with Dagobert.
Well, you know, it's funny you mentioned that, because, I can tell Andrea, and I can tell all the Dagoberto files, files in the world. I must invite you to tune into Facebook and Instagram tomorrow, because he will be 20. He's turning 20 tomorrow.
Oh,
and wow, I can tell you,
he's that old.
Yes, he's amazing, which is quite old for a cat. And Dagobert is in great shape, because since the confinement, our daughters, Louise and Constance, are back home. And for him, it's like, you know, the good old days. He's been around for 20 years in our family. And so he's basically a little brother to my daughters. And they consider him that way. We consider him as a son as well. And anyway, he is going to be 20 tomorrow. So there's going to be a lot of social network activity regarding
celebrating his birthday.
Indeed, he always insists on having his own chair. And so when you guys came to me, so 8 chairs for Voces 8, of course, plus the 4 of us, plus 1. So it was a large table. And
remember it very well. Yes. Now, the reason I mentioned France is because we recorded our discs with you in France, in the most amazing setting, in a little town called Hermont, which used to be a church that you held concerts in as part of the Bach en Combraille festival that you used to run. One of the things I really remember about the church is very, very unusual. It's built into a hillside, isn't it? It's like made from volcanic rock, is it? It's built into the hillside, and it's sort of, as you enter the front door, you go down some steps where the church has been dug out into the side of the hill. And we've made quite a lot of albums there. We made Voces 8's own album, Eventide, was recorded in there. But we also did this Purcell album in there. And I thought maybe we could play a little track now so that everybody can appreciate your wonderful harpsichord playing. So maybe something from that Purcell album before we talk about it. And perhaps rather embarrassingly, I think quite a good example of your continuo playing is in a track where I sing a solo. It's called Strike the Viol by Henry Purcell. So let's have a listen to that. And it's got an instrumental section on the end where the harpsichord's particularly active. So here then, so you can appreciate Patrick's brilliance, is Strike the Viol. So. That was Strike the Viol from Voces 8 and Les Inventions album called A Purcell Collection. It was myself singing and Patrick Ayrton directing from the harpsichord, his wonderful orchestra Les Inventions. Now this album actually came about quite fortuitously and has been one of my proudest moments, certainly as a musician in Voces 8. So I seem to remember that we were going to record a Dixit Dominus album, works by Handel and Vivaldi, and then I think maybe it was the French government pulled some of the funding. So we thought, well, what can we do that doesn't have so many musicians? And this was what we came up with. Do I remember that correctly?
You remember that? It absolutely, yes. Well, there was a bit of a yes. We had a technical problem on our side here in France regarding funding. It's complicated. Won't go into that, but we were confronted with a situation: either cancelling the whole thing, which would have been very sad, or just a plan B with fewer musicians. And we thought of Purcell. I love Purcell. I mean, you guys sing Purcell. And so I remember we spent, we had to act quickly, and I remember you and I having to come up with a new program, specific pieces, a playlist in a few hours. And I think it was quite fun because you made a list, I made a list, and then we confronted it, we
So we
compared
compared,
them, and
didn't
we
we?
had beautiful selection
I
within a
still
few hours.
remember. I really still remember the hotel room I was sitting in. It was a sort of small Germanic hotel room, I think, in the countryside in Germany. And I had like a wooden desk, and I really felt like it was almost one of those places which is lit by candlelight. And I felt like I almost had a sort of Purcellian composer's table. And I remember sitting there. It was almost the days before we had technology for everything, handwriting all the pieces of Purcell I'd ever sung or listened to
Yes.
that I really,
Yes.
really liked. Oh gosh, I remember that. We had to, we even had to speak on the telephone. We couldn't, speak on FaceTime or
Oh,
anything.
medieval. That's medieval.
Medieval, the year 2013.
I know, I know. Yes, so much has happened since, and but what has really stayed very fresh, I must say, is that album and the Marcello also. Extraordinary church you referred to, Barney. Yes, quite an extraordinary place. It's on a pilgrim's path, important pilgrim's path in France. A small forgotten village. Um, it was quite extraordinary when we went um, there for the first time with our producer. He wanted to hear the
We
church,
went down and
and
Nick,
that was
Nick Carter
quite
produced it. Yes, we went.
quite
I
extraordinary.
just remembered
And
something quite funny. Yeah, you go first.
yes, no, well, no, it's just one of these sort of places which forgotten about. They're not almost not on the map. You know, you just stumble on these places, and the acoustics are just glorious. And that's what I really appreciate as well in those two albums. Is just hearing the space which is around us. That is so important. I remember my organ teacher. He would always say, "You don't play organ. You play the space. You have to.
Mm.
You cannot just play your organ pieces without just thinking of the
For an
space you
organist,
are."
it's very important because the organ is built in specifically to that building, so it's almost a part of the building. So I suppose that's a
Exactly.
particularly important thing.
Exactly.
One of the things I remember about our visit there was Nick, the producer, said, "Well, look, these roads go very close to the church, and that could be a problem." So we went and knocked on the door of the mayor's office, and we introduced ourselves. I think you knew the mayor from working at the festival. We said, "Look, we'd love to record here, but this is going to be a problem, what we think." And he was so keen that we went and used the space. Did you remember he actually shut the road so that
He
we
shut
could
the road.
record in this church?
Shut the road.
The road that ran
Yes.
the top and the bottom of the church. He actually closed them. Very, very sweet.
He was very proud. He was very proud that his church was being used for that, and he certainly encouraged us to do more. And I think that's when you did a Decca recording
That's what we
after
took
that.
in charge. Yes.
Yes, and which is a beautiful one. And yes, well, these are extraordinary memories. I also remember the little hotel, which in the meantime has closed down. There was a
What it
hotel
was
which was on the
called?
verge of. I mean, they basically had just a few clients in the summer, and that's all. But I think we were the last, and that little hotel,
It was
which
lovely.
cost just nothing, and where they cooked for us every evening. It's wonderful. These are things one thinks, only exist in books or in films, but it was reality. And I think that contributed to the
I agree.
inspiration and to us making albums we can be proud of.
Yes,
I certainly think so.
I really agree with that. Yes, that's the Purcell Collection album. It's just got to use the French word, a mélange, isn't it? It's a
Yes,
mélange.
melange. Yes.
So,
It's
really,
wonderful.
but it got
Indeed,
great
indeed.
critical acclaim. So hopefully
Yes.
you can go and look that up. You can find it on Spotify and all those types of places. So,
Yeah.
and
Indeed.
I hope, Patrick, that we can do something again in the future. That'd be really, really nice.
So
So I
do
want to
I.
ask you before I let you go a couple of sort of personal questions, I suppose.
Hmm.
Through your orchestra and all your work, you explore uncharted 18th century composers. So we've heard about Tushmelin and Benedetto Marcello. And if there was one composer that you wanted people to listen to who wasn't particularly well known at the moment from this era, who would you choose?
There is a German composer called Rosenmüller, and he's from the
Yeah.
17th century. He's now relatively well known, but I believe that he was an absolute genius, and he wrote extraordinary vocal music, extraordinary chamber music, so fresh, so inventive, so in a way so inspiring, and I feel that we should do more to get to discover his music, and there is still so much out there. But I'll tell you, Barney, what is fascinating me these days the most. I'm using these are weird times, and since the confinement, well, I've been at home, no concerts, so lots of time to practice and research and read and think and reflect. And I've been looking every day at pieces by Haydn, Joseph Haydn. Now, Joseph Haydn is a very famous composer, isn't he? So this is sort of not at all what you were asking me, but I'm looking at the unknown works or the lesser known works by Haydn.
Yeah.
And this is what fascinates me. I've been looking at his very first symphonies and his very first piano sonatas, and trying to understand how each piece, how his style, his genre developed through the years. And this is absolutely fascinating because I was telling you just before about this Pachador canon, and then I realized that there are a lot of Haydn symphonies which have the same. And if I do this, this is exactly the same structure. And what fascinates me really is I've been sort of laughing my head off sometimes just at seeing how composers not stole from each other, but use the same kind of mechanisms and schematas to compose music. And in a way, all these great composers, I don't like using the word lesser composer, but composers of all kinds use the same recipes. And of course, they reach different results, but at the basic molecules remain the same. And this is what fascinates me the most, generally in music, and what I'm researching a lot these days in particular. But yes, I talked to you about Rosenmüller, and of course, I find that Buxtehude is an extraordinary composer. Mostly organists know him.
We've never done a Membra Jesu Nostri of
yes,
Buxtehude, so
but there's some
that would
great
be
stuff.
something lovely to do.
You guys sing Buxtehude?
Not very much. No. I mean, the one work I would love to do is the Jesu Membra.
Membra Jesu
Yeah, I got
Nostri.
it right the first time, then I was confusing myself. Yeah, the Membra Jesu Nostri. I would absolutely love to find an opportunity with Voces 8 to perform.
I think that would suit you very well, and not to mention all his many cantatas we have never heard. Some of them have been recorded now, but there's still a
Here we go. It looks like we're finding the project here
yes.
live on air, Patrick.
Yes, absolutely. I think a Buxtehude project together would be smashing, and yes, and there's so much. Also, just to come back to the confinement, I've been, it's time to read all the books You probably have a pile of books, Barney, as well. You'd be
Pile of
thinking, "Oh, I
scores,
must
all
read
that
that when
sort
I
of
have
stuff.
time." Well, now we have time, you know.
Yeah.
And I've been reading wonderful things about how Buxtehude organized the music at church. He was a Kapellmeister, and he had to organize music. He had lots of musicians, and there's we know a little bit about how things worked for Bach in Leipzig, but we know a lot about how things worked for Buxtehude. We have almost every single contract, every single letter, every single document related to Buxtehude and his musicians, his church musicians. And a very funny anecdote I was just reading 2 days ago. This will amuse you. There was a man, I think he was called Johannes Müller or something like that. He applied for a job. I think it was a oboe job. You know, someone needed the position as an oboist. And he writes a letter to Buxtehude. He says, "Dear Maestro Buxtehude, my name is Johann Müller, and I play the harp and the organ and the flute and the viola da gamba, and I'm a singer, and I play double bass, and but I'm interested in the position as oboe player." And this, of course, is wonderful because it teaches us a lot about how different those times were to ours. We live in a time of specialization. We specialize in things. But back then, well, you know, it's very normal to play at least 6 or 7 instruments.
Yeah, and we talk about this idea of versatility actually being a crucial part if you want to be an ensemble singer. We had a lovely chat with dear Emily Dickens, who you'll remember very fondly, about this just a couple of days ago. So,
and just to finish the story, Buxtehude replies and says, "Dear Mr. Müller, very happy to receive your letter. I'm delighted. Unfortunately, the position is already taken, but we have a place for you as a viola player if you want."
Oh, great!
So these are charming things to read. So inspiring. I think it belongs to musicians. My message to young musicians said, you're playing this piece. Try and know as much as possible about the environment in which this piece was born.
Mm-hmm.
Just flow. Let yourself just flow into those days, those times. Read as much as you can. Inform yourself on as much as possible, and that will contribute to the way you play that piece.
Well, you know, whenever I approach any project or piece of early music, I am always looking to, you know, with our performance and with our musicology, to preserve that element of history. But I think the best way to preserve that history is to make it relevant to the future. And I always found, this is a lesson I learned from my music making with you, was that you found a way to bring this ancient music and make it live in the modern day. And I can hear, just sure the viewers can, just from listening to you talk, how excited you get about these projects. And again, coming back to that idea of how much energy I found in your Bach, this is something that you've been an inspiration to me and to Voces 8 for many years, is making the music of the past relevant to the future. And for that, early musicologists around the world should be exceptionally grateful to you for all of your wonderful work, both as a performer and as a pedagogue. So thank you, Patrick, for everything you do. I think, you know, I would love to finish with quite a long piece, actually, but I think it's definitely worth listening to. It's the center point, the centerpiece of our Purcell collection album, and I think it demonstrates the point I've just made, because there's so much glorious orchestral music making in there, which just raises the morale of Voces 8. And you can always feel when we come in that we just can't wait to sing on the back of your fantastic energy and music making. So we'll say thank you very much for giving us your time today. Wish you
thank you, Barney.
Joy Isolation. It's Patrick Ayrton we've been speaking to. Lovely to catch up with you, and we'll finish by playing a coronation anthem, I believe, by Henry Purcell. My Heart is Inditing.
Thank you, Barney. All the best to you.
Thank you.
Spalus,